All right, welcome you guys to a special edition of the Captain's Chat. So obviously a lot of people on here that you see. I've got. Sorry, that was supposed to play before, and that's terrible. I'll talk to my executive producer again, but no. So we have with me special guest here today, Joe Jackson from Maricopa, Arizona. Coach Gumber, who's in Austin, Mandy Goff, who's in Birmingham, Alabama. She's a high performance manager for USAWR. Chuck Aoki, longtime member and two-time Paralympian, down in Kerrville, Texas right now with all the beautiful art. And Montrarius Hutcherson down in Alabama by Auburn. Remind me of the town again, Montrarius?
Tallahassee.
Yeah. So, and we never call Montrarius. We always call him Boonchi. So if you hear Boonchi, that's why. But we just want to be here today and be able to have a conversation about what's going on in our country as a sport and as a member of the USOPC. And we're not immune to these issues, and we want to talk through them and have a conversation about them. Will we get everything right? No, but I think it's important to have these conversations, to voice our opinions, to voice where we're at as athletes that represent the United States of America, and disabled athletes that represent the United States of America. So you don't see her in here right now, but Dr. Margaret Smith, who is our sports psychologist since 2015 and lives in Birmingham, Alabama as well. She's going to help facilitate the discussion. So I'm going to drop myself off, and then Meg's going to kind of get us started, and we'll rock and roll.
Hey.
Hi, Meg.
Great to see y'all. So I was hoping maybe we could get started by talking a little bit about what it's like to build a high performance team among members of diverse backgrounds, and kind of how we approach that here at USAWR and some of the challenges we've faced.
I'll try. Are we going to just kind of jump in? All right, right on. So, I think we start to look at, we've talked a lot about throughout the movement, diversity and inclusion. And I think people look at our team and they're like, oh, they're super inclusive. Like they got people with disabilities, but we need to think on a more broad, spectrum, looking at not only the makeup of our staff, but our athletes as well. And it's been super important to me that, we are able to create something that representation, we talk about representation matters. And so to me, it's always been important that we have representation of all groups that are included in not only on our team, but on our staff. Chuck talked a lot about, as you and Joe talked a lot about it, as kids, whether you have a disability or not, having somebody to see that looks like you, but that also that you guys as people with disabilities, able-bodied athletes look up to you, but also that throughout your culture, I think that it's important for people within your culture to see you as athletes, not only truly attaining their highest goal, but also within that makeup, really using that platform to better yourselves and those around you, specifically your community. So I know we talk a lot about community. I mean, Chuck, you're from Minneapolis, and so I know that this probably hits, even though you're not there right now, this hits hard. And Joe, you're up near that area, so I know this probably hits hard for y'all. But to me, that's always been so important as I came in to help kind of build that makeup.
Yeah, I think to kind of continue off of what Mandy talked about and to kind of build this into this larger conversation that we're having both as a country and on a national level and then on local and smaller levels on down, I think it's really important for us to continue to do a really good job of, kind of active and constructive listening. What I mean when I say that, and I think our team does this in a really good way in sports, right? I think this is something teams are typically good at with doing when it comes to talking about the game, when it comes to talking about strategy, players, workouts, whatever. Really good about talking in active listening, constructive way, which is saying something, listening, giving honest feedback. I can't do that. I have a hard time with that. I don't understand what you're saying. Can you explain it further? I think it's something that we're really good at doing in like that very concrete sense. It's something real and quote unquote easy to talk about. It's easy for us to talk about the sport we play and the sport we love and we spend our lives doing. That's something easy for us to talk about, but it can be a lot harder sometimes to push beyond and really talk about these more challenging topics. And I think that that's something that, you know, as a team, we try to do. We try, you know, we want to look at all of ourselves as athletes, but also as people as a whole, and recognize the whole that goes into each athlete on this team. I think that's something that's challenging to do sometimes. And I think this current time in our country is forcing us to reconcile with that. Is, are we making sure that we're truly sort of getting out what everyone on our team needs in every way? You know, beyond just, are you have the training you need, you know how to work out? Are we really turning to you as a whole person and making sure that this society is one you feel comfortable in, you feel safe in, you feel you can achieve the best you can do? And as someone who is, largely identifies as a person with disability more than not really a person of color, it's something that I see my role as really facilitating that and trying to make sure I'm doing everything I can to lift up voices and lift people up and find ways to do it. And it's a learning process. You know, I'm not to where I want to be. I know that I could be a lot better about things, but I think that in terms of sort of how we've constructed our team dynamic, I think we have a good basis of honest conversation that can really be good, but then it's sort of being able to push past that and really, how do we get to these really challenging topics that go beyond just our sport and go beyond saying, hey, you need to be faster, right? Everyone can kind of understand that in this context, but it's a little more challenging to do in other ways. So I'd love to hear from, Joe J or Boonchi, sort of how they feel that has manifested, because as newer guys, I think Joe and I and Gumby and Mandy, like all of us really, have been around for a long time. And so quite frankly, I barely remember what it was like to come into a new team and a new dynamic. So it'd be interesting to hear from you guys sort of how that has developed and where we can both do well and where we can do better, more importantly.
As a new player, I would say you guys were pretty welcoming. Like I've known you guys for a while, just playing against you. So it wasn't anything that was hard as far as like coming in and gaining some experience and gelling with the team. From the get-go, we were always pretty honest and open, which is extremely helpful. So I didn't really have a hard time transitioning into the team and just kind of getting along with everybody. I'm not sure how it was for Bucci.
Me being a new player coming over, it was somewhat challenging because I knew the standards was a little higher, but everybody welcomed me with open arms, and everybody I already knew I had to step it up a little bit from transition from club team to the USA team, and everybody's very helpful. So once I got the chemistry with certain players and stuff like that, it was no problem for me. I think we get along just good.
Hey, let me ask you this, Boonchi. You were an athlete that kind of was around before you ever were on the team. Like you came and saw, like you watched us play, you came to a practice. Like from an outsider's perspective, looking in, what did you observe? Like what were, as somebody that came in just outside of the game piece of it that you had to step it up, but like as just some person watching, the year before you came on, like what did you observe?
Like it's a lot of dedication, a lot of hard hitting, a lot of communication. It's once the players get rolling, I mean, it take all four on the court to make it happen. And I just when I first seen it, I just gave them, most respect to them. Like they really, I here busting their butt to really make it happen, even though they do have disabilities, this and that. And I didn't see nothing stopping them. And now that I'm in the same shoes as them, I'm gonna do the same. I don't see nothing stopping me.
And from my end, it's as being one of the long timers around here, it's always been important that a couple of things happen for a new person. Is one, they feel safe, that they are respected for what they are and who they are when they come to the program is that you're there because you have incredible talent, but you're also there because you're a valued person. And that's always been something that we've worked hard to do. And the other part is that we're active listeners to people. You know, it's a challenge, you know, when we don't get together as much as we want to, and when we're, you know, in those moments where we're 17, 18 hours awake in together with each other when we're in camps, that we get the most from each other. And part of getting the most is being an active listener and hearing what a need is. And I mean, Joe, I throw this back to you. It's like you've been there for a while. It's like, how was it for you? You know, you talk about Joe J, but it was like when you came into this, you didn't necessarily have a whole lot. You had Chad and you had Aoki around you, but I mean, you came into a group where, you know, you were surrounded with like Will and other athletes that were you know, from a different time than you were. And how did that work for you? I mean, was it accepting that time, or is it something that we've continued to build as a culture that's made it even better?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and no offense to those old veterans, they were accepting into their culture, of course, and a lot of that was more of a culture of like, we need to get the goal done, and we'll hang out and be friends, and that'll be good. But at the same time, like, it was very like mission focused or goal oriented, which is okay. But I think, you know, for us in the last probably 5 to 6 years on the national team is we throw the word love out a lot. And for me to truly love Chuck or Joe or Bunchy, I have to know them. Like I have to be willing to know them. I have to be willing to have conversations with them. And it doesn't mean that everyone on the team is going to be best friends. Like, that's impossible. But it does mean that you understand where someone comes from, and that takes a conversation, probably conversations. And so I think that's kind of what are striving for here. And hopefully we've done a good job. I think what Chuck was saying early on, that there's room for growth. And I think a lot of times apathy sneaks in without you even noticing that it's apathy. And you know, the word empathy is getting thrown around a lot, and empathy only comes from you understanding what someone is going through. And so, like, there's a lot more sympathy probably than empathy, but because each person's experience is extremely different. All 6 of us on here, Meg, who's in the green room, like, all 7 of our experiences talking today are completely different. And that's a beautiful thing. But in order to acknowledge the differences, we have to start with conversations. And I think a caveat to that would be that we know that conversations, and Coach, I know I've heard you say it, and I think we all agree, like, we know that words only can mean so much if there's not action that follows, there's not works that follow. So that's right. Yeah.
So if I can ask this, you know, and you said this, Joe, and I see it every time we're together, and I've seen it forever. When we're together, it's almost sacred. It's magical. We're all there together. We're all family. It's so special. But when that last whistle blows and we go back to we get on a plane or we get in a car and we go home, you know, it's so hard to understand what it's like for anybody on this team, because we go back to being different responsibilities. We go back to being dads, and you know, go back to being workers, and going back to being in school, and it's, you know, that doesn't even encompass what it's like in our everyday lives for what our world looks like. And that's where I think, from my end, it's so crucial that we understand who you are, as not just Joe the rugby player, or Chuck the rugby player, or Bunchy the rugby player, but who you are as a person, because it matters. It matters so much. I mean, it matters to me that I know what's happening in your world. It helps me to be able to understand you. It helps me to be a better coach, but it helps me even to be a better person, a better man. in working with you and developing our relationships. So that's a big change that I've seen and seen it happen over the years. And it's a powerful thing. And I think that I said it earlier, but is listening to each other is so important.
And Joe, I think you hit, I'm going to say this real quick. I know you're going to bring Meg back in, but I think you hit it. Acknowledgement that we're all different. We all identify differently, and we need to meet that person where they are, whether you agree with them or you even understand it. Like, taking a moment to acknowledge it and like listen about that person's life, you might begin to agree or understand more than you thought you would, by just opening up your mind and your heart a little bit.
Thanks, y'all. That's really, really powerful. And so it's lovely to hear about the ways that this team comes together and builds space together. And at the same time, we're all part of much larger environments, and we're all part of very different environments. And so I wonder if anyone would be willing to speak to what it's like to navigate from the team environment to the larger social environment that you're part of, and maybe some ways that you see systemic social inequities impacting team members and the team as a whole.
I can jump in on this, Meg, quickly. I think when it comes to impacting sort of our team as a whole, I think by and large, the challenge with having an elite level sports team is, at the end of the day, it is a lot more about performance. And so I think we do a pretty good job across the board of picking the best 16 players. I don't think in my time, and I mean, Gumby knows me long enough, I'm not afraid to say something if I think something's wrong. And I think we've always picked the 16 best players, and I think we've done a good job of that. I think for us, within our sport and within Paralympic sport in general, is we have to look at some of the real structural barriers that have access to sport. And this is true in able-bodied sport and Paralympic sport, but I would actually argue is more so in Paralympic sport. And I say this, it's expensive to get involved in adapted athletics. A wheelchair rugby wheelchair, a used one that has been used for years, is going to cost you thousands of dollars at a bare minimum. And I think that that's a real challenge that we all have to grapple with and find a way to struggle through. I think that that's something that is a real structural barrier that impedes. And it's not just in rugby, quite frankly. It's in wheelchair basketball. It's in wheelchair tennis. It's in all of these sports where money is a really big barrier to being access to sports, unfortunately, which is really upsetting and frustrating, And I think that that's one thing that we can do a better job of, I think, as a national team, of finding ways to develop ways in which we can get access to equipment easier for people, because that's a critical barrier. And that's at the end of the day, that's our critical pipeline for having athletes come through. It doesn't matter if we have the most equitable structure, the equitable selection procedures, we have, the best way of doing things. It doesn't matter if people can't physically get to our training camps, get to tryout camps, get to tournaments, and pay for equipment that they need to use that, I'll give Joe Jackson a ton of credit here. He has his own foundation where he's able to give money to people to get equipment, which is really expensive. And it's something that, I personally know that I have a lot of privilege in how I'm able to have my equipment, and I need to do a lot better at. Yeah, James and Joe, James works for CAF and Joe works with CAF, a great organization, but it's the kind of thing we can do more. So I think in terms of really concrete, because like Mandy and Joe said, it's about what can we do to really push this forward. And I think that's something that's really important, is finding ways to break down, quite frankly, those pure just money barriers what we run into with our sport. So I can ramble a lot, so I'll just pause there.
No, honestly, that gets me fired up. I think of Joe Jackson as well. Like, he's been doing it for a decade, and thinking through and like that action, a lot of the words, and then, okay, what's the action look like? And I mean, you look at it and like, honestly, let's have the conversation. Like, our sport is extremely white in our country. Like, it is. It's just, and then like I'm pretty sure spinal cord injuries aren't prejudiced against whose necks are getting broken, and like, and I think we've got to do a better job of finding out why, good old Corey, finding out why those numbers are the way they are. And it like, sure, it could just come down to numbers, but I think there's probably a lot of access barriers that are happening in the Black community and in other minorities as well. But I think, man, like it's got to be out there. The athletes got to be out there, and maybe we can do a better job of helping them through some of that systemic stuff. Talking specifically with finances, and obviously CAF and their grants are amazing. But like we're talking about someone that might not have access to like do everyday life skills to be able to get a computer and then do it. Like there's a lot more steps in front of filling out the CAF grant or filling out a different grant, or maybe helping maybe USAWR in the future being able to have some sort of grant as well. But
you bring up a good point, Joe, about how just in general, the barriers that come to a person with disability about accessing equipment, but then you add in the piece of like, I'm throwing out there is privilege. There is privilege all across the board. And when the privileges that sometimes aren't there for people with disabilities, and then you add in the piece of, if you're a person of color, how that can even affect you even more, transportation, access to different things that can create barriers. So I don't know if any of you want to talk about that, how that may have affected you or those that that maybe are on your club team that you helped get in. I mean, that's a big piece, I think.
I don't think I've had a problem with the grants. I really actively try to find as many as I can, like CAF grant, Will to Walk, Kelly Brush. For some reason, not many people actually hit me up on the Joe Jackson Foundation, which is weird because we're looking to give out these grants because equipment, it's expensive. It's like $5,000 or more just to be active. So I think it's just kind of being able to spread the word. Like you get a grant, spread the word so someone else can benefit from it.
Joe, what's that website name?
Which for mine or what?
Oops. Oh, sorry. What's that website name?
JoeJacksonFoundation.org.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be getting in contact with you.
Oh,
I didn't even know you had that.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, and we on the same team.
It's age based too, so yeah, it's for the younger side.
But you're too old.
Oh, I didn't know. I'm just
Is that org or .com?
.org.
Let's remind everybody that Boonchi is just a brand new player. He's only been on the team a few months, so we do speak as an organization.
Yeah, is that right? JoeJacksonFoundation.org.
Yep.
Hit this man up. He just said he was looking to give money to people, looking to give grants to people. So if you're listening and you fall in that criteria, that'd be found awesome.
So I just want to highlight, this is a perfect example of how Joe has taken, we talk about our values, our core values on our team, and that, yeah, they're important for us to keep our mission like driving, but like it's also important to take those values and apply them to your regular life. And how do you help others and help better your community? And doing something like this that's huge. I mean, that's what we need to be doing as a greater population, is how do we make those around us better every single day by the privilege that we have and the things that we have access to. How do we make those or help empower those around us? I think it's super important to empower those around us to have a voice, because sometimes they don't feel like they do. And so not to drive off, but how do you feel like you can empower others around you, to have that voice, to speak up? I mean, Joe, you and Chuck are, big and the AAC, and promoting that athlete voice. How do you help those, around you grab that voice?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. I think for all of us, there's a personal responsibility in this whole conversation. And no matter where your moral values are, where like what you believe and not believe, like there's always going to be a personal responsibility to being able to look in the mirror and going, have I done enough, or can I do better, or have I been apathetic towards the Black Lives Matter movement, or have and then it starts inside your home, and then it morphs into like, who are your friends, like who you like, what, and then from there, like that's the controllable part, that's the actionable part that honestly doesn't take a whole lot of skills other than examining and recalibrating what's inside your heart or mind. And so I think that's the easiest action item. Like where am I at? And has there been some and it's not like a guilt trip for anyone. I don't think anyone wants anyone to feel bad about the color of their skin. Like that's the opposite of what the point of this conversation is. I think it's important though, is am I seeing this person for who they are and how they're made? And and that involves skin tone, and that involves me getting to know them. And then that involves in my inner circle, in my inner friendship, is there diversity, or am I just hanging out with the people that look exactly like me? I mean, for us, with disabilities, that's always usually a no. We're usually a token wheelchair person that's hanging out with the group. We always joke around that if there's 4 or 5 wheelchairs hanging out, it looks like a hospital outing. So we don't want to do that. But no, I'll digress. That's kind of my point.
Well,
yeah, I think I'll pick up quick. Sorry, Gumby.
Go ahead.
I'll pick up quick where Joe left off there, which I think really a crucial point that we need to have in our voices, because I do think within our team we do a pretty good job of it, but then extending it broader, like Mandy mentioned, into the broader athlete world. I mean, when we were at the Pan American Games last year, we took a straw poll of all the sort of reps athletes who were there about the protests that had gone on that year at the Pan American Games, where the athletes had knelt, and it was about 50-50. Half people supported them, half didn't, and it led to a really kind of uncomfortable conversation that was had between different groups of athletes. I think if you held that today, things would be a lot different. I think that people recognize it. And I honestly, to myself, and I recognize as a fault of mine, I wish I pushed harder and said, look, what these athletes are doing is not about disrespecting our flag. It's about calling attention to something else. It's not about this. It's never been about this. And I wish I had done better with that. And I think it's a learning experience that we all have to go through. I think that's something that I find important in this is always ensuring that we're helping the others learn. It's never any one person's responsibility to teach you something. You have to go out and be willing to do a lot of the learning on your own, but it's okay to ask for help at times. You say, look, I've been trying to do this. I don't quite get it. Can you please sort of help me? And some people will be receptive, but some won't, and that's perfectly fine. No one owes you anything to teach you about the things you should understand and learn about. But I do think it's important that we push forward and aren't afraid to have those critical conversations. Like I said, I feel personally like I missed a really good opportunity last year to begin that conversation. I think the USOPC is understanding the need to get through it now. I think we have a ways to go. And I think we as an organization, again, can do better job of using our voice to say, look, we have to stand up for things that are right. We need to say Black Lives Matter. It shouldn't have taken what it's taken to get to this point, but we're here now, so let's push forward from here. All right, G, sorry.
Yeah, and to just kind of pull this back in, it's like I sat here and, when I'm watching these horrible, the worst of us happening and saying, how can we turn that to be the best of us and make it better for all of us? And, Joe said this, it kind of, you start at home. And I mean, for me, I look around and it's like all of us have been that new guy, myself included, where, you're a new person with disability and you come out to a practice and you don't have the right equipment and somebody gives you another chair, or you come walking in and you really need an everyday chair and somebody gives you an everyday chair. That has always been something that's been, I'm proud to say, has been a part of our tribe, and our tribe being our team. But I see that as being, it should be no different for us, for anybody. You should be in that place that if you have something, you reach out, you help with something. And hopefully that's something that, as a team, we've been able to give to each other that, it doesn't have anything to do with anything other than humanity and taking care of each other as a person, and appreciating the situation that you're in, and being empathetic and listening and saying, okay, we're going to find a way to get you through this, because we come through a place where there's not a lot of guidebooks to get through, and being able to say to somebody, hey, here's how we're going to help you through this and get you started. That's, for me, that's where I start with anything that I feel uncomfortable with, is being in that place where it's like, help me so that I can help somebody else. And so that's where I look at, like what you're talking about, Chuck, with the Para Pan Am games, and like saying, okay, how do we handle a situation like this? But the bigger question we should be asking is, um, why are we in this position? Why shouldn't we be in a place where we wouldn't even have to deal with that because we're treating people the right way? Period. Um, I mean, that's where I come from. So.
So, in working toward getting there, maybe it would be wonderful if anyone would be willing to share some of their personal experiences of how you've learned to push back on or challenge systematic structural inequities, and maybe some concrete ways that our team community and other team communities can continue to support you and build up. All of us in that work of pushing back on systemic inequity.
I talk so much, so I feel bad continuing to go on and on.
No.
But briefly, I guess I can just say on a very small level, because this is something that I personally need to do better about. But I think one thing I'm trying to be better about, at least within, is essentially pushing other white people who identify as white to reducing performative allyship and really moving forward into actually being an ally in actionable ways. I think it's something that's really important for us to do because, I was guilty of it the other day. I put a black square on my Facebook. A black square doesn't do anything. That doesn't mean anything. It's an attempt to stand for solidarity, and it's well meant in a lot of ways, but it really doesn't mean a lot at the end of the day. And so I think it's helping both recognizing myself and then pushing people within my circles to go further and really move beyond that performativeness and find ways in which you can actually help. You can actually push back in structural inequities, and it can be small things. It can be standing up to that person you see at the grocery store who's treating someone poorly. It can be on a lot bigger scale, where it's pushing elected officials and protesting or marching. There's a lot of ways to do this. I think that not everyone is comfortable with going to a march. This is something that I've been talking with some people about. Is it's a little scary to be a person with a disability in the midst of thousands of people in the middle of a pandemic. That's not something that everyone's comfortable with. So it's finding ways you can be realistic, but real things, not just talking about it on social media. Really pushing forward at being actionable.
Bunty, Joe, what are your thoughts?
I'd say, very similar to Chuck. Just got to ask people, learn about what you don't understand, and then try to take smaller steps forward as well, and then just pass it along, pay it forward.
Agree with JJ on that one. If you don't know, just ask and move forward with it, and just try to do what's best.
So if I can ask you this, and I asked the question, I can't understand what it's like to be a person of color, but I do know that I can stand with you. I do know that that's something that I can actively do. I can tell you, to Chuck's end, putting something up on social media doesn't do anything if you don't follow it up with your works, and it's important. Those things are important to me, is letting you know where you are in my life and why you're that important to me. And being able to not act like I'm coming from a place of like, hey, I understand, because I can't. As much as I try, I can't. But I can let you know that as much as I can understand, I can stand with you. And that's for me, that's where I begin a lot of this. For me is like, I'm going to stand with you. I'm going to stand by you. And if it affects you, it affects our team. It affects our world, our tribe, our lives. And for me, it's important. And I think that's what a lot of people miss out on. Is it is important, and it's that opportunity to let somebody know that your differences are just that, but that they're important to me because you're important to me.
Well, and I think there's a couple things there that I guess I would, I mean, social media and like just throwing it out there doesn't necessarily matter, but I do think like if a leader of our organization, or you know what Mandy posted on for USAWR, and she posted, like, that means something because that's an invitation for a conversation. If she doesn't post it, you're going to have negative connotations to like what she believes or what USAWR believes. And so like the first thing to do has to be, hey, where do you stand? And then that might be an invitation. Like there's always those seeds you're throwing out there that you never know, like if they're getting planted or if they're getting watered, but like you're throwing them out there still. And so like the positivity and the words do matter, but then the follow-up matters more. So I agree there. But I think just, you know, a couple of those simple steps are important because a lot of these conversations aren't happening because people are fearful. They're fearful for saying the wrong thing. They're fearful for being like, well, if I slip up once, they're going to Drew Brees me on Twitter. Even though obviously he's slipped up a lot more than, but anyway, but like, I would rather have someone come out and say something and mess up than stay silent on this issue. And I think that's an important piece where the fear-based silence is a problem. And I think like there's a bridge, we can build that bridge and to start having those conversations, because I think, we talk about being safe to have this conversation with our team. And I think our team and our organization, like it's really well built to where those conversations already take place. But I would say, like, if you broaden the scope a little bit, and in the adaptive world, like, guys, the adaptive world's a vicious place. It really is. I mean, like, it from a Paralympic level, and then on a world level, like, I think there's a lot of, it's a small community. And so there's a lot of like measuring going on between individual athletes or team whatever it would be to try to grasp some of those small finances or some of those small grants or whatever they'd be. And there's a lot of comparison going on, and there's not like communication or building each other up going on. I think there could be a lot more people building each other up. I mean, Katie Holloway from Paravolleyball and her podcast partner are spreading that language. And there's a couple other podcasts out there with adaptive sports that are trying to spread that message and language. And I think there just needs to be more of it. I think USAWR is doing a great job with it. But I think we can do better. Like, and that means, what does that mean for the players that aren't on the national team that are in the USQRA, and how can we build that bridge? And I guess that's more of a holistic thing than just Black Lives Matter, but I think that is more slide right along with it. And so like the building of each other up, the lifting each other up, and then like, what are the action items to be able to do that well?
I think too, Joe, that the first step in being an ally for whether it's you're in the disability community or, for us, what we're talking about for those teammates of ours or athletes who, are of color, that I think being an ally is not having a conversation. You see it a lot in the disability movement. Nothing about us without us, right? And so we don't need to be having conversations about you without you. Like, we need to be in on your conversation and listening. And I think that's the first step in being an ally is, not only just saying I stand with you, but like you said, opening it up to those who are in, my bigger circle. They know where I stand. There is no question, there is no question, and you will not come into my world, and speak about people that I love in a hurtful way. So I think opening it up and letting people know where you stand, I think helps generate that conversation. But you're exactly right. I think we're all, nothing should be done out of fear, right? When you have a safe environment to have that conversation, you don't feel so bad for messing up or saying the wrong thing. So I think it's important to create that environment where, like where you guys had the opportunity as a group of athletes to have an athlete town hall, right? Not with any staff on there, but for y'all to have, a town hall to talk about these things and to bring up things that are bigger picture items that you feel, so much value on. And so I think just being able to create those safe spaces wherever they are, if they're in your, Meg brought this up, in your, faith-based community, if they're in your friend group community, having that place for you to be able to go and talk, and then also from there build out.
Awesome. Yeah. On that notion of building out, right? Like in a system that's characterized by scarcity or by competition, like Big Joe mentioned, sometimes a community where there's a lot of competition for resources, people can internalize that. In my field, we call that internalized oppression, where a system that oppresses people, individuals and groups, can then absorb that mentality because there's this scarcity and there's this competition for resources. And so I wonder, ways that you all, as a team, intentionally foster joy and alliance as a way of resisting internalized oppression, and ways you see that other communities might build that out as well. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Well, I think I can just briefly go first. If I go first, I talk less because that way I don't let other people want to say things. I think really one way our community does it, I mean, the USAWR Rugby, and I mean, the disability community as a whole does it, is through humor a lot. It's one way we kind of foster that pushback against things. I think that's a really important, I believe that's an important skill to create and to drive, to push back, because you sort of are able to use it on so many levels. Humor is sometimes a very effective way to convey serious messages that are important, that people understand. It helps you convey things that may be difficult to convey sometimes. It helps you point out sometimes the absurdity of situations that we find ourselves in. It's like, how could we even put ourselves in these places? This is ridiculous. So I do think that's one potential skill that can be used. I think that it needs to be used judiciously, but I do think it's something that is helpful in terms of pushing back against those vicious cycles sometimes of we fight each other more than we're fighting the systems that are oppressing us fully. I think that's the one way we can form that camaraderie with ourselves. I think that's really important to work for and to do, but it's challenging. It's something that takes constant effort every day, and it's not the kind of thing we can just wake up one day and be good at it. It's an ongoing everyday process of learning and repeating and hopefully getting better, sometimes taking steps back, but always sort of pressing forward.
I also think it comes down to listening. It always comes back to listening, hearing what that other person has to say, and then maybe relating back to them. I know that's helped me a lot. It's just having that friend there to listen and spit out what I'm thinking, and then they relate and like, oh, you understand, you get it, and then moving from there has helped.
One thing I was going to say too, I think, sorry, Joe, you were about to talk. I was just going to say, allowing yourself to be, we talk a lot about being vulnerable, right? Being able to be, vulnerability is huge on our team, and Coach has got a little smile on his face, but that's something I think he and I both have worked really, really hard on. And I think as the leaders, whether you're a leader in a staff position or a leader in an athlete position, I think being able to be vulnerable helps you to listen. I think when you're not vulnerable, you have your guard up. So I think that can help potentially in this space.
I use humble a lot in my world. I mean, you guys humble me a lot. Sometimes it's funny through humor. Sometimes I'm just humbled by being surrounded by incredible people that are doing things they're not supposed to do. I'm just extremely humbled and grateful to be a part of that. And I think that the characteristic that I see people grow in this tribe. They come in and they're in different places by the time that they leave, and not at all of that is just happening on the court. I see so much maturity and that comes from that place that we continue to work on, that people are their value and their what Joe said, what they say is important, and it's heard and it's listened, and when somebody makes a mistake, that it's just that it's not a personal thing, it's just a mistake, and how do you grow from that? And it's huge. So
yeah. Well, Daniel Curtis brought up a great question. At the U.S. Paralympic level, do you see diversity well represented in our sport? Whoever wants to knock that one out of the park here first, go right ahead.
In our sport,
wheelchair rugby.
At the USA Paralympic level, do you see diversity well represented in sport? So, I mean,
it's I'll jump on this real quick. It's like, if you look at the teams throughout the world, and depending on what region of the world is, you'll see different types of diversity. I mean, I say some of the factors that we talked about earlier, with like economics and who's getting hurt, or who's born with disability, or who contracts a disability, has a role in that. I think that everybody could be more diverse, honestly. I think there's space and room for that. Aoki said this earlier, though. A lot of it's based on performance, and it should be. As a coach, I mean, you take somebody because they are the best at what they do, not because of who they are or what they may look like or anything like that. You want to take the best athletes for the positions that you're filling them out there for. And so I think all those things play factors into what a team looks like. I'm incredibly proud of that we've continued to build, and continue to this day build upon taking great athletes, and the other part of that is teach and inspire those athletes that were taken, regardless of race or gender or disability, and make them as good as they could be. I'm very proud of that part of who we are, but I think there's got to be room for growth.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a loaded question too. I think we could spend an hour talking about diversity, because then you have to actually define what diversity means, because there's ethnic diversity and gender diversity, and there could be physical disability diversity, and then you talk about the different countries and what they bring. But maybe a better question for this conversation, probably the harder question, would be: have you seen prejudice in our sport? And just being honest, I think that there's still fear amongst our sport. It's very white. Sport's very white, and when someone comes in and looks different like that, it's been a problem in the past. And we've had an athlete that, to be honest, it seemed like he had prejudice against him because of the color of his skin, and and the way he looked and presented himself, which is extremely upsetting. But I think if we stand here and not talk about it, then this entire show doesn't mean anything, because we've seen it firsthand from our point of view.
Joe, clarify that. Do you feel he felt that prejudice came from our team or from outward?
No, yeah, sorry.
I
think that prejudice came from the outward wheelchair rugby community involved with getting him. There's a lot of athletes in our sport that have more function than him that are in our sport, but they're white, and they're not black with dreads and tattoos, And so I think it's just, and maybe that'll ruffle a lot of feathers, but I think it's important to say, and it just is.
And I'll completely agree with Joe, and I think it's something that I again, this is sort of thing where personal growth, I need to be better. It's something we should have called out when we saw it happen. We should have, but sometimes it's hard to know, where do we do this? How do we do this? And I think, to Joe's point, sometimes you just have to say things. right? You just have to put it out there, say it publicly, and then begin to push rather than searching for a perfect place all the time. So I think that Joe's completely right. I think that we've seen it in our sport. It has happened. And it's something that we need to not be okay with. And we need to find then not just our own team, but our other countries to say, well, yeah, this wasn't right. This doesn't make sense. You know, why is this the way it is? I think, as Joe said, wheelchair rugby is a very white sport overwhelmingly. To Daniel Curtis's question, I think I'll briefly touch on that as well. I think U.S. Paralympic sport isn't bad diversity-wise. I think it's pretty good. I think some sports are more diverse than others. I think that's an issue though that sports that a lot of swimming, for example, faces up and down the board no matter what. They have incredible lack of diversity it's just a fact, and they know they need to do better about it. But I think the other part is that just because I personally, and I work with a lot of leaderships of other athletes, so I talk to people periodically, and just because I haven't heard people complain and I haven't heard issues doesn't mean they're not there. It means people may not have felt comfortable with coming forward with them, which I think is one of the biggest things that hopefully our team can take to these other levels and say, look, we have ways of having open conversations. We can say things, we can be honest, and then move forward from it. I think that's something we do well. Our team is something we should continue to do. And I hope that U.S. Paralympics, and I know I'll be continuing to push them forward to do, is to set up these spaces where we can have these kinds of conversations, both on sort of these little grassroots levels all the way up to, you know, like you said, national team levels and things that are really frustrating. And we'll now feel comfortable with pushing forward and calling things out where we see them.
And I think we as leaders, Coach and I speak, that what we could do to help in the sport is we have a platform and a voice, not that y'all don't, but we have a platform and a voice on the international side of things. And how do we push our international federation as well as just here local, you know, in the States, but how do we push our international federation to broach this subject specifically? Right. So that I think is a challenge for us, not only as leaders, but for you guys too. If there's committees that you can sit on, I think that's where we can begin to not only just take that stand and say we stand with you, but then take that action step, right? And push on our federation to approach the subject. How do we become better? We're in a new time in our federation where they're looking at things and trying to change things and trying to professionalize the sport and make it better. This is a great way to start.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for the conversation. I think Meg has one more question that I think it'd be super interesting to hear you guys' response from, specifically the people with disabilities. But we'll get her back in here and
Yeah, so this is a big question. I think this is the question Joe's talking about. We'll see. But I wonder if you would be willing to share at all in this brief time that we have left, any of your experiences as a person of color with a disability that you feel might be particularly powerful for people to hear, maybe learn from, and just going to clarify that it doesn't have to be negative experiences here. It can be empowering experiences as well. So any experiences you feel that our listeners might be able to carry forward in conversation.
I mean, I think it'd just be an interesting conversation to have, not only with our team, but people in our community where, especially with, you know, like with when you have ethnic diversity in your background, like me as a biracial man or Chuck, half American, half Japanese, or Joe and Montrarius, is like, what do people see first? And it may be I'd be curious, Montrarius, for you, like what do you perceive people see, especially when you're going from like walking on your prosthetics to sitting in a wheelchair? Does that change? Does that perception change at all with your level of disability?
It changed some, and sometimes it don't. But like some people, like they see me walking my prosthetics, then they'll see me in a wheelchair. I'm like, then someone be like, "Oh, he's just faking" or something like that. But you know, I'm like, it is what it is. But I use my prosthetics just to move around a lot quicker because I have a 3-year-old, and it helps get a lot done with him. And I just, you know,
People think
I'm looking.
people think you're
Go.
faking because you just started using a wheelchair and you're really terrible at wheelchair skills. That's probably why.
That's probably why you can say that.
For me, I'm trying to think of experiences I've had. Maybe like in a grocery store or something. I don't notice it, but when I'm with Sarah, she'll notice it, where people are just staring at me, and I guess I've gotten oblivious to it. Like I don't care what you're staring at. I'm just gonna go on and pick my cereal or whatever it is, and I'm not sure if it's because of the color, if it's the disability, or if it's both. Like, I don't know. Could be both. It could be one or the other, but it also doesn't bother me. So just trying to live my life.
I just will briefly say that I've been in situations where, even with you guys, and I think, Chuck, I've heard you talk about this, but I've been in situations where I'm with you guys, and when we're waiting at the airport, and they come and they talk to me, and I'm like, don't talk to me, talk to him. You're asking how they need help, on the plane or whatever. Like, why are you asking me? And I am not afraid to speak up, and not to try and make somebody feel bad, but like you said, like calling it what it is. Like, I'm not the person that you need to be talking to. So that's where I've had instances, and I'm quite certain that y'all have had those as well.
Yeah, you usually get that like Aunt Rue face on. You're like, talk to them. Just the accent gets thick. Talk to them then. Like, all right, I'm sorry. And I just gotta apologize. I think I said something really stupid when I was saying Chuck's half white, half Japanese, not half American. That was really dumb. See, there you go. We're not saying everything right. I'm sorry. It's terrible. No.
It's okay. I forgive you.
So do you, last question here, and we'll wrap up, but do you think there's an extra level of discrimination to overcome with function envy that subconsciously encourages separating people by uncontrollable circumstance? How can culture fix that? Man.
James would ask that, wouldn't he?
Well, that's a Meg question too, where like, I gotta dissect it for a good 15 to 20 seconds to figure out what she said. Same with James. Very smart guy.
Great question though.
Yeah. I completely botched that, and I'm sorry. Exactly. That's why I just apologize.
When it comes to like the function thing, I can just tell you, I've seen it since day one. I've been in this sport, just in the sport frame of this. I mean, if somebody were to see somebody stand up and walk, back in the day, 1990s, 2000s, they were like, you got no place in our sport. And, if you kind of come from that place, it was really, questionable to these mindsets of like, why are you playing the sport? This was built by quads. It's for quads. I mean, there was utter discrimination because it's like, you aren't one of us. You don't look like us, so you don't play the sport. And as we've evolved and it's become more wheelchair sport, more inclusive, it's had the opportunity to make us better. And I mean, I can remember Aoki when he came into the sport, and there was, I mean, Chuck, I don't know if you remember, but I mean, there was a lot of push as to why is he eligible to play our sport, and he sweats and he can kind of hobbit himself around. That's what I call what you do, is hobbit yourself around. And but in that same light, it's like, why is he able to play our sport? And it's like, because he qualifies, he fits, he is part of the group that fits in our sport. And so I've seen people have function envy for a long time.
2002, Beverly. He didn't wear a glove now. So, and I think, James, kind of I've had like a good full minute to read that question 30 times because your big words confuse me sometimes. But I think what you're getting at, and I think as players, how can culture fix it? I think Gumby has done a great job. Mandy has done a great job. And when we're bringing someone in, and a lot of times at the USA level, we're trying to develop high pointers. Like that's always been the thing. I mean, Chuck's been around for a long time now, and it's always been like, well, let's find him a sidekick and let's figure that out. And, you know, let's, and I think, like our USAWR, I'm trying to find the best way to say this, but like USAWR did that in 2016 and did it quick, but they were probably ahead of the curve on like wanting to bring guys in. I think some of us were like, you know, myself included. I mean, I didn't go to Rio based on some of those guys going or based on my own play or based on, you know, it could be, but at the same time, I probably was like, I want to find something wrong with them, whether it's function or whether it's chemistry or whether it's whatever, to justify myself going instead of making it about me and not about someone else. And so I think fast forwarding that to our culture right now is I think we want to be as accepting as possible with whoever comes in and wants to develop. And it's, you know, judge based on character. And still Martin Luther King Jr. quote, judge based on the content of their character. We're extremely, I think we do a good job of trying to hold each other up to that and building each other up and calling each other out. And I think that's something that we strive to do in a better way. I know I do, and I know I've failed many, many times. But I definitely want to be better at that. And so how can culture fix that? Probably by sacrificing your own personal gain so you're watching out for the better of the team, I think is what it would be.
Yeah, I think just to put a quick bow on James's question, I think that Meg points out that really, you know, it's internalized oppression. Once again, it's a mentality of scarcity, but it's calling for ourselves within our community, at least, that we're in this together, right? We're all really battling through this together, you know. And Jody said, let's find Chuck a sidekick. Well, I've had 11 sidekicks every year I've been on this team, not sidekicks, teammates. But the point is that I've had 11 players who have made me the person and player I am the entire career. I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for, you know, your development, Chad Cohn, Lee Fredette, Joe Jackson, everyone, you know, even Boonchies, you know, even a little bit of time we've played together, it's made an impact on my career and how I've played. And so I think it's important. I think that's one way we can kind of do that, is internally not letting those things divide us and kind of finding a unity on particular messages that are important within our community. And there'll be pushback sometimes. Some people will say, we just want to win a gold medal. Some people say we want to be more than that. And it's having those internal conversations so you can be as unified as possible when you push forward. I think that's true of both within our team and these larger conversations and challenges our nation is facing as a whole. Is what is it that we as feel is important? Who can I talk to about this? And how can I, you know, even if you don't agree exactly with what someone is saying, how can I push you forward to be better and to do better about these kinds of things so we can be productive and constructive and continue to move forward? I personally, again, believe, kind of like Joe said, it's not particularly helpful to simply tell someone who disagrees with you to stop talking, because you need to engage with them to get them moving forward. It can be frustrating, it can be angersome, you can be like, how dare you believe that? And I think there's a place for that sometimes, but there's also a lot of places where a lot more opportunities to push people to think and move forward. I've seen growth out of people who I never would have expected to in this time, quite frankly. And it gives me hope that we can all move forward as a country on issues that challenge all of us.
Hey, and I know we're wrapping up, but I just want to quickly say this because Joe brought it up on mine and his captain's chat last week, and he was trying to remember the full quote, and it was Martin Luther King, because I think we've shed light on a couple of things today, hopefully, and we talked a lot about love. And it's darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And Joe, I think you were trying to reference those words last week when you and I were talking, but I think that hopefully through this, like, we've shed some light on some topics and not been afraid to talk about it, and that we have really focused on the fact that we love on this team, and we love hard and we love big, and we want to encourage others to do that. So
yeah, and I'll just add to that, the action items in that quote are you have to love, so you got to turn your love on, and then you have to turn the light on. Like, you can't hide your light, you have to turn it on and actually be a voice. And so thank you for all of you guys doing that today here on a really cool captain's chat. Joe Jackson, thank you. Coach Gumbert, thank you. Montrarius, I never get to call him Montrarius. Boonchi Hutcherson, thank you so much. Chuck, thank you. Mandy, thank you. Dr. Margaret Smith, thank you so much. So if there's questions, as always, reach out to any of us. And you can find more about us on USAWR.org. Instagram handles is super active. If you want to hit up Coach Gumby, you definitely want to go to the Twitter. He's he's a coach. The coaches live on Twitter, so we'll be there. Again, Joe Jackson Foundation.org. And so if you're under, I think it's, Joe, remind me if it's under 25 or under 21 or something like that.
It's 26 and under, spinal cord injuries.
Oh, Bunchy.
Great place to go. And so there's money out there, there's grants out there, there's opportunities out there. And again, just love each other, turn your light on. And man, I think we'll make the world a better place, and hopefully at least our community is a better place. Any other closing thoughts, guys? All right, we'll see you next Friday. I'm back with a normal episode. Not that this can't be normal. This should be normal. A normal. Josh Wheeler is going to be here. He's currently getting his miles in for the Houston Challenge, so hopefully he'll be able to stop for a second to talk to me. So we'll see Josh on Friday. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.